Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Gelbart. I am a presenter and a journalist at BBC News. And I work in one of the biggest newsrooms in the world. It's fantastic, it's dynamic, and I absolutely love my job. But I do have a bit of a confession to make to you today. And that is that sometimes the news can make me feel a bit anxious. You'd think I'd be immune to it, right? I have been working in news for over a decade. But there are some days when I can just feel this tightness in my chest, my stomach drops. And even if a crisis is happening thousands of kilometers away, when it pops up on my phone, on the screen behind my desk, it can feel like it's right in front of me. And I wanted to know why that was. Why is it that something that's meant to inform us can also make us so anxious, like we're in real danger? So I did what I'd do with any other story. I started digging. I spoke to neuroscientists, psychologists. I went through the research, and what I found has changed the way that I think about journalism. Because I found that the news isn't just shaping our view of the world, it isn't just informing us, it's actually changing the physiology of our brains. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. You're going to hear what the science tells us about how the news affects our brains and our bodies, but why we're also wired to be drawn to bad news, and what we can try to do to protect our mental health without switching off from the world. And I'm also going to bring in some of the things that I have learned from the BBC show that I present called What in the World, that tries a slightly different approach to the news. So before we get into all of that, I want to do a quick poll. Please be honest with me here. Put your hands up, okay? How many of you read or watch the news every day? Okay, that's about half of you. How many of you feel anxious or overwhelmed by the news? Quite a few of you there. And how many of you avoid the news altogether? Some, a few tentative hands. Well, I'm not alone in how the news makes me feel, and the data backs this up. Every year, the Reuters Institute at Oxford University in the UK, it does a survey of nearly 100,000 people in more than 40 countries, and it's trying to track how our news consumption habits are changing. And for the past few years, this is what it's found. 4 in 10 people are avoiding the news. And that number has been going up. People in the survey said it was because of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. They said that it made them feel overwhelmed, that it brought their mood down. There was simply too much of it. It can be relentless. I know the feeling. I remember back in February 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I was working with a team of BBC journalists at the time. It's now known as BBC Verify. You might have seen some of their work. And our job was to go through footage of the war as it played out on social media in real time, to make sure that what we were seeing was accurate, but also not too graphic to be broadcast on the BBC. I watched hours and hours of footage. I nearly forgot to eat. And in the years since, it feels like that kind of story just hasn't stopped. There have been numerous school shootings in the US, and of course, right here in Graz. There was the attack by Hamas on Israelis on October 7th, Israel's retaliation in Gaza. And I want to take you with me inside the BBC newsroom. So this is where we work, and as journalists, there are screens all around us. They're on our desks, they're on the walls, they're above our heads. We're constantly exposed to this kind of story. Now, it is our job, of course, to know what's going on. But I still wanted to find out, what is this kind of news doing to my brain and to the brains of our audiences? So let's take a look at what goes on inside your brain when you consume news. Starting off with the amygdala. It's highlighted here in yellow and enlarged just a little bit. And there are these 2 almond-shaped structures. There's one on either side of your brain. And the amygdala is your brain's alarm system. So its job is to detect threats and to fire your fight or flight response. Now, this is a really important part of our evolution. It's helping us to survive. But nowadays, it's also being triggered by certain headlines, breaking news alerts, pictures, videos. And that is not how we were designed to respond, especially not 24/7. Now, the brain has also been studied in a news context, and I'm going to take you through some of that research and I'll share the sources as we go. So in one experiment, people were put in an MRI machine, a bit like this, and they were shown graphic footage of war, injuries, and accidents. And the researchers found that when they were viewing the footage and when they had flashbacks of it afterwards, the same parts of their brain lit up as with people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this means that trauma, whether you witness it, whether you experience it firsthand, or whether you see it later, it leaves a mental scar. And that counts for traumatic news footage too. Initially, the interesting thing is the brain just can't tell the difference between physical and virtual danger. This was another big news story. You might remember it. It was back in 2013 and there were 2 fatal explosions by the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Footage of this attack looped for hours on every channel. And it formed part of a major piece of research. Professor Alison Holman had a group of nearly 5,000 participants, and she found that those who watched 6 or more hours of footage of this attack self-reported higher levels of stress than some of the people who had actually been there. They were more stressed than people who had witnessed or survived this fatal attack. And that stress, it went on for months. It made them worried about future attacks, so they watched more news, they got more worried, and that fueled a vicious cycle. And when I spoke to Professor Holman, she said these effects, they don't just mess with our minds, they also show up in our bodies. And she talked me through an earlier piece of research she had done. It was after the 9/11 attacks. This is Ground Zero, the memorial site in New York. And 9/11, of course, was when planes were hijacked. They were flown into the Twin Towers and other buildings, killing thousands of people. And she found that watching news footage of this attack led to higher chances in some people of developing heart disease and other physical health conditions years later. So, too much of this kind of news, it can affect our minds, it can affect our bodies, but yet we still keep watching. So why is that? Well, it is also because of how we are wired. That same brain of ours that gets overwhelmed, it seeks out information, it seeks out answers, especially in uncertain situations. And we're more drawn to threats than to comfort. We do tend to dwell on the negative. And this is something that scientists call negativity bias. And it's also been studied in a news context. In one experiment, people were tracked when they read down a news website, and it found that even if they said they preferred positive news stories, they spent more time on the negative ones. And another one found that negative news stories created faster, stronger, more impulsive brain responses than positive ones. This used a brain imaging technique. So we're drawn to bad news. We can't help it. It can give us a hit of dopamine, that hormone that feeds into our reward system. And that is one of the reasons why we doom scroll. I don't know about you, but I can be guilty of staying up for hours scrolling through social media, scrolling through the news. And the more intense, the more emotional the content, the more of my attention I give it, the longer I watch, even when it makes me feel worse. And here's something that I've started to notice, and maybe you have too. Nowadays, news sites and news apps, it seems like they're also imitating social media. You can scroll infinitely through them. There are videos that autoplay. And it makes me feel like there is so much news you can never get to the bottom of it. But let me be clear, I'm not saying we should avoid the news. I have many brilliant colleagues who risk their lives for their reporting. They tell difficult stories, things that are important for us to know. And these are some of the stories that have been on the BBC News website recently. There's something about peace in the Middle East, that ongoing narrative. Something about Russia and Ukraine. A remote tribe in the Amazon that people are trying to protect. These are interesting stories, and more importantly, they're things that we do need to know. Hurricanes, wildfires, pandemics, global conflicts, elections, or whether it's going to rain tomorrow in the UK, which it probably is. These are things we need to know, and we need to be able to trust that that information is accurate, especially in the world we live in of disinformation campaigns, deepfakes, AI-generated content, algorithms that control what we see. So here's the tension, guys. We are caught in this love-hate relationship with the news. We want to be informed by it, but we don't want to be emotionally drained by it. And I want to go back to that Reuters report that I mentioned earlier, because it found that increasingly young people, by which it means under 35s, they're not getting their news from traditional places like the BBC. They're getting it from social media. And increasingly, it found a trend in news podcasts. And that brings me on to something that I want to talk to you about today. It's a daily podcast from the BBC that I present, and it's called What in the World. Every day we talk about news, current affairs, and trending topics for 16 to 25s around the world, people who want to be informed but not anxious. And we launched about 2.5 years ago, and when we were trying to work out the format of this show, what we wanted it to do, to sound like, how could we make the news feel different? We listened to a lot of podcasts. It was a great part of the job. And we found that so many of them are styled around self-help. So we thought, what if the news could feel like self-help too? So every day when I'm back in London with my brilliant team of producers, we ask ourselves, what does this story mean for our audience? What does it mean for you? Why should you care? And how can it leave you feeling more informed and not more anxious? These are some of the stories that we have talked about recently, like how AI is taking jobs from graduates. We've talked about white nicotine pouches. They're everywhere in the UK. You can see the little round packets on the floor. Are they becoming the new vape? And also, how does censorship of the internet work in China? And of course, we talk about global conflicts, cost of living crisis. And people seem to like it. We've been on trips around the world, we've met audiences, we've got feedback. And one listener said, it's not just politics and doom and gloom, it's stuff that people my age actually speak about. So we've seen that the news isn't just informing us and shaping our view of the world, but it's also shaping how we feel. It can activate our stress responses. It can change our behavior. It can even affect our health. But that doesn't mean that we should avoid it, because we still need to know what's going on. So if any of what I've talked about sounds familiar to you today, I want to leave you with some tips, some self-help, if you like, with your news. Firstly, notice how the news makes you feel. As we've seen, sometimes the brain can't tell the difference between physical and virtual danger. So when you're looking at that news app on your phone, if you feel anxious, if you feel overwhelmed, that's your brain sending you a signal. And you can respond to that signal by trying to reduce that stimuli, reduce the overload. For example, you can set a time window, 10, 15 minutes to check the news instead of snacking on it throughout the day. And talking of snacks, your brain, like your body, needs a balanced diet. Your mind is what you feed it. Constant fear strengthens fear pathways. But you can balance that out with stories of hope and solutions as well. And next time you find yourself on TikTok looking at videos of people making cakes or the latest dance trends, maybe you don't have to feel so guilty. Maybe that's your brain's way of trying to protect itself a bit. And finally, be selective, not saturated. We live in a world of information overload, and no, you don't have to know what's going on all the time. I do, but you don't. You can get your news from different places as well. If traditional news media websites don't work for you, if that is just too overwhelming, that's fine. Try newsletters, try social media, try a news podcast, but just make sure that it is from a source that you can trust. So the challenge here isn't to switch off from the news, but it is to switch up how we engage with it. And that's something that I think about every single day. Because as journalists, we really have to think about how we make people feel when we tell them the news. Thank you.